Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the 757 Renaissance Man podcast. This episode is a long time coming. I am here with my big brother, and hold on, let me get it right. Dr. John Lewis. How are you doing, sir?
Well, my friend. I'm doing well, brother. How about yourself?
This is great. I can't stop smiling because our history is so deep, man.
yeah, it is. So that is the crazy part about it, is that this is the evolution of what we were doing back at age, in the 8
80s.
and 10. Right. In the 80s, right. In the 80s, you know, people talk about 80s babies. I mean, we were teching it up with gaming platforms and stuff like that. You know, I had an Odyssey 2. You're like, well, let me throw that back. I'm gonna show you. I got an Odyssey 1. And I was like, oh shoot, I didn't even know they made one. So you're like, I got a pocket. I'm like, I got a pocket too. Like, oh shoot. So this is incredible, man. This is us. This is definitely a game recognized game. You know, we are. Man. It's good to be here, and it's good to be here with you specifically on this platform.
So we were black nerds before we realized what black nerds were.
Right.
And I'm talking about 5-6 years old together.
Absolutely.
Like I remember, like you brought up the Odyssey, but then I remember when I got the Nintendo, and then you was like, "Well, I got the Sega Genesis." No, it even goes back before that. I had Atari 2600, and then you got the 5600.
It was like people didn't even have platform wars where we were having platform wars, right?
It didn't even exist.
It didn't exist. Oh man, and that's so. But you know that's. Isn't that what it is, though? Isn't that the history of our people, that that we were next level before anybody else knew about it, right?
Right. Before like we saw the whole progression of the video game industry. It wasn't even an industry back then.
Right. It was just, it was really incredible, because I remember what you brought up was you're like, hey, I got that at home. Odyssey, they make this. I said, oh yeah, what? And you're like, you had Pong. Mm-hmm. And I was like, Pong was that was the quintessential, that was the first video game that people were playing at home on their TVs. And you look into what has evolved to then, and you and I were just kind of early adopters. That's the term that we use today, right? We were on that on the leading edge of gaming technology, and actually home computers. We were programming back in those days too, before we talked about STEM and all those things. And yet, if you read the narrative, you will believe that people like you and I didn't exist.
Right. It's okay. So I'm glad you brought that up. I go back to our childhood, and we were extremely blessed because we came up in the late 80s, early 90s, when the whole narrative was, there are no black male figures in the house.
Right.
Everybody's in the hood doing crack.
Right.
And I was like, no. I had a whole community of black men to look up to.
Absolutely.
Not just my father. I had your father. I had a church full of men doing things that were either in the military, worked for the shipyard, had their own businesses. And so it was hard for me to I went through like an identity crisis a little bit, because it's harder. Like, this is what they say it's supposed to be, but this isn't what it is. Right. And then we got to think about our parents personally, like my dad and your mom together, just them. We're not even talking about the other parents or my dad and your mom influenced me a lot, and my dad influenced you a lot.
Absolutely. And so that is the narrative that these platforms and podcasts, and now people amplifying Black voices, allows us to rewrite. Mm-hmm. We talk about the 1619 Project as if critical race theory and all these things are brand new. No, these stories are old. We're just telling them to the masses now. Mm-hmm. You and I lived these stories where we had strong Black figures in our churches, in our households, who told us an alternative history beyond that. You were,
Mhm.
you were in Africa, you were a slave, Abraham Lincoln's freed you, and there was Martin Luther King. We knew our stories were richer than that. So your dad, if you allow me to, give him, his shine,
Mm.
was the first Black health professional I ever knew. It wasn't even a question like, oh, could you do this stuff? Could you not do this? Your dad was a commissioned officer and was in the, health corps, or whatever the division was at that time, in the 1970s, and that was unheard of.
Mhm.
But it was enough to make it a tangible, a living thing. Well, I'm like, oh shoot, I can grow up. You're like, I can grow up. I can go into science. I can
Mhm.
be go into medicine. I could be, because your pops had done it.
Mhm.
We had to stop thinking that Black people are this monolithic group, that we have one story, one narrative, one outcome. We knew people in all industries. We knew pro athletes,
Yeah.
guys who went to high school with us,
Yeah.
but we also knew, like I said, doctors,
Mhm.
lawyers. We also had school teachers, brothers that were in the classroom. Mr. Parker, shout out to the guys
Yeah.
at Deep Creek. We had I'm going to use this, I'm going to flip this. We came from a place called Camelot,
Mhm.
a land of kings and queens.
Mhm.
That's where we grew up. We grew up in a place of roughly 1,000 households of working class, middle class, and some even upper middle
And
class
to give a
Black
little bit of
families.
history on that,
Right.
Camelot wasn't meant for us. We took Camelot over.
So the two sides of one coin. Let's break it down. Let's chop it up, as you like to say. Let's break it down. So there are two sides of the coin of America that change the complexion and sometimes the wealth and health outcomes of our society. This is what I came to Emory University as an emergency physician to kind of integrate into health.
Mhm.
It is colonization. It is then settlement.
Mhm.
It is then, from that point on, segregation,
Right.
integration.
Mhm.
Then you have this phenomenon called blockbusting, redlining,
Mhm.
white flight. All of those things speak to the physical narratives of geography that have happened in America in the last 400 years.
Mhm.
Each one of those phenomena cannot live without the other. They're not all healthy, they're not all whole. Our neighborhood was one of those things. It was a suburb of Norfolk, Virginia. Chesapeake eventually became its own city.
Mhm.
757, stand up, two
That's
up, two
right.
down.
Two up to that.
But it was still plagued with some of the history of, this neighborhood is for this group of people, this neighborhood is
Mhm.
for this group of people. That's how the country was settled. We moved people out and took the desirable lands. And eventually, because of merit, because of conscience, because of policy, we allowed other people who were often weren't desired or displaced to move back in.
Mhm.
But that did not prevent those other counter mechanisms or those reactions, such as white flight. So we grew up in a neighborhood during a time where integration was hot. That was a new
Mhm.
thing. They're moving us back in. They're allowing us to have opportunities to buy homes in areas that were primarily excluded from us. What happened from that point on, there was an egress of a certain group of people,
Mhm.
and we filled the spaces. Nature abhors a vacuum. So whenever something leaves, something comes in.
Right.
Whenever
Right.
someone leaves, we fill that space. The greatness about that is that we lived in a place that was very much influenced by the military, and the military had already set a standard for integration into the masses for a multicultural diaspora. That's what the United States military did, for good or for bad. It brought people in, took over lands, and allowed those people to come in and be a part of that country. And Hampton Roads looked like that. So our neighborhood was actually just a symptom or a byproduct of all those mechanisms happening at the same time. Some of it was for the bad, and your and my story, it was for the good.
Yeah.
It worked out good for us.
Mhm. Yeah. I didn't like when people say, I grew up in the hood. Well, that means a totally different thing for us.
It does.
Because our hood wasn't what you see in minister society.
Right.
Our
Right.
hood was, we all grew up in single family homes.
Right.
And one of the great things about, I can't speak to how Camelot is now,
Right.
but our community was so deep where, you know, we could roam the neighborhood and we could
Right.
have those adventures
Right.
because you knew my mom knew if I was on your side of Camelot, your mom was look out for me and vice versa.
Right. Right.
I was
Right.
doing something I wasn't supposed to do. I think we're the last of that type of generation where by the time I got home, it got home before I did.
Right. Right.
You know,
You had a hot plate of Ackright waiting for you.
right. Like,
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
If because your mom would snatch me up too.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So, and that was a golden era. And just not to wax nostalgic, but it was a golden era where there was accountability in community,
Mhm.
right? And I have the saying when I do some of my public talks that community is cost effective. You don't have to worry about babysitters. You don't have to worry about childcare. You don't have to worry about daycare. All those things are interwoven in a tight community.
Mhm.
You don't have to outsource or spend those things. And we benefited from that. When you came and spent the day at my crib and we're playing games or we riding bikes and stuff, nobody was paying anybody to watch somebody, right?
Right.
We took that little bike mission to someplace else. Nobody was paying anybody to watch. And yet there was this
shout out to Devil's Mountain.
yeah, Devil's Mountain behind Camelot. Yeah, behind the elementary school. Nobody was watching us, but there was an accountability. And there were a row of homes back there. People would see, they're like, oh, yeah, that's Sean and John, or that was Walson and whoever. Everybody knew everybody's kids.
Mhm.
And there was a richness in that you couldn't pay for even if you had to put a dollar sign on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So it's cost effective.
My kids are very jealous of our childhood because, I still rock with people that were in kindergarten with me.
I believe it.
And that's kind of how our neighborhood was. Like,
Right.
We had a school. It was Camelot Elementary School. Everybody went there. But we also were one of the last generations where the teachers that taught in our school lived in the neighborhood. And
Right.
that made a real big difference. And we all came up and, yes, we're in a military transit town where people came and people go. But for the most part, out of the 25 kids in my kindergarten class, I still rock with 10 of them at least.
Right. So shout out to Mr. Deborah.
Yeah.
Black science teacher, well ahead of his time. Shout out to Miss Connors.
Yep.
Shout out to
Miss Valentine just passed.
Oh no! Rest in peace to Valerie Valentine. It is a.
Hold on, we forgetting the kindergarten teacher, Miss Norfleet.
Oh, Miss Norfleet, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
all these teachers lived in the neighborhood.
Absolutely,
and
Miss Walden.
Miss Walden. Yeah, my mama and Miss Walden. They still bringing up stuff I did back in the day.
Yeah, Tony and I were in band, till we finished. It is. And for the people who are like, what are they talking about? We're talking about people in your neighborhood. And I'm going to spin off. There's a series coming out of my podcast I'm going to want to link to. Don't you know your hood?
Mhm.
And it is important to recognize the pillars of your community and to spend time listening to their stories because they help us evolve as a larger community. They help us learn from their victories and as well as their defeats. And these are people in our community who did that for us. There were people who taught us lessons of life beyond just the textbook. So we're shouting out this Hall of Fame. That's what we're doing. We're running the roll call.
Right. And these are people who made me and you be who we were.
Right.
If it weren't for these people, they may not be a Dr. John Lewis.
Right. Absolutely.
And to see the people actually live and breathe in your neighborhood, it's a certain amount of currency that they added that is, like you said earlier, it's priceless.
It is. I often look back and wish I could thank people that probably are no longer with us, and I said probably. I don't know where they are because I've lost touch. Some of them may be around, and I've gone back to like some of my high school teachers. I remember when I was going into med school, just to give you a short story, Dolores Eure, E-U-R-E. She was my English teacher. She had been there generations, taught us. When I finished Morehouse down in Atlanta and was applying to med school, they said, have an English teacher read your personal statement. And who was there to read my personal statement but my high school honors English teacher, this sister who had finished, I believe, Norcom back in the days, had come through, grown up in the area, was still giving back to the community. I didn't pay her for that. She was just invested in the well-being and then my future and the future of us as a whole, that she sat there and she looked through, she critiqued it. It was a moment that was, I could never pay anybody to do that. This
Mhm.
is the lady looking at my entrance application to go into med school, somebody that maybe 4 years before she invested in, and that I am still reaping the benefits from now, some 30 years afterwards. That kind of stuff is powerful, man. And I think there's a moral obligation for us to do the same. You and I are trying to do the same thing. You mentioned,
Mhm.
your daughter. I mentioned my kids in previous podcasts. I do. It is our moral obligation to not be containers but conduits, to allow what people poured into us to flow through to that next generation. And so this conversation is just that we're pouring into another group of they're going to come behind us and
Mhm.
hopefully amplify this message even louder.
And that's one of the reasons I do this, because this is my way of acknowledging our history, especially with the whole 757 Renaissance, man. I want you to know, some of the history of where you came from. Because I find that as we get older, that's one of the things that we're lacking. And, I just shifted it to a different medium. Writing isn't really my thing, but I can do a podcast and have this podcast live on forever. And you can go back and get that history. So you
Right,
can't never say nobody ever told you.
right, right. So the editorials in the newspapers and the manifestos of maybe 150 years ago are what podcasts, blogs,
Hmm.
platforms are today's social media. The ink and the papyrus has changed, but the message remains the same. These are just, as we call them, they're media. They are basically conduits. They are things to hold a message, but they are really not the message in themselves. This message has to live on about the importance of our history, the importance of history, period. I mean, that is, I think, man's worst subject. People like say, I'm not good at math. I submit to you as a whole, we're horrible at history
Right.
because we keep forgetting lessons
Rewriting
learned.
the history,
Right.
right?
Right. We
And
keep
trying to make
rewriting.
the history fit in your agenda instead of
Right.
it being the history.
Right. So you and I are here right now trying to preserve that, knowing that that's vital to the future. Past is prologue, they say. They say what has happened before will happen again. So you and I have to make sure that that is multi-directional, not that just the bad that has happened before has a potential to happen again, but the good that's happened before
Hmm.
has to be potentiated to happen again. And that only happens when people know the history. As my brothers and sisters of the 5% Nation used to say, knowledge of self.
Hmm.
We have to have a knowledge of self. If you know, as you and I are Christians, as a man thinketh, and we'll say that as a woman thinketh, so she is. So when you know who you are, it is self-determinate. It helps you become that which you may not be at the time because you have a knowledge of it. And history is what facilitates
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. So it was no way in the world we could have this conversation and not bring up Camelot.
that.
It
Absolutely.
was no, because Camelot is a huge part of what made us
Absolutely.
who we are, and a
Absolutely.
lot of other people. And we're gonna talk about it later. But what up, Watson? What up, Steve? Both Steve. We were the Black Nerd Collective back in the day.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I said that to say I want to thank you, because I never have publicly said this, but you were a huge role model to me. And I always felt that I knew John Lewis was the smartest person in the room. I was just trying to be in the room with him, you know? And we're going to toot your horn. We got to toot your horn. First of all, tell the people how old you were when you graduated.
From high school or
Yeah,
from
from high school.
high school, I was, I think, 17.
How old were you when you graduated from college the first time?
So I graduated from college. I believe I finished early. So I believe I was 20.
Yeah,
I did in three and a half, three and
yeah.
a half years.
And grade point average?
Oh, shoot. You gave me like 3.5, I think. I think I was right in the middle,
Mm.
3.5. I was right in the middle. I'll be honest with you. I don't consider myself the smartest guy in the room. I consider myself blessed with a few talents that have allowed me to have a wealth of experiences that I can probably share with other. One of those talents is that I find my memories probably a little more keen than the average memory, so it's allowed me to remember things very keenly, and that's just a blessing I have. It's nothing that I have.
John, John,
Two though, I gotta say this, man.
John.
I'm to a certain degree relatable and likable, and when you're relatable and likable, people are willing to give you information that they otherwise wouldn't share. So that's it, man. I'm not I'm
That
no
is
more
exactly what
intelligent.
the smartest person in the room would say.
No, no, I'm not. I am not. I've
All
been
right, so
afforded
we
I've
talked
been afforded the
about
opportunity
we
to
talked
bump
about the
against
whole
people.
technological bond we had,
Okay, sure,
but
sure.
you were the first person I knew that skipped grades in school.
No, no, I didn't. So this let me demystify this.
Oh,
So when I was in elementary, there was this program that they would test a handful of us, and I'm gonna
hmm
shout out some of the people. Peace to Melvin Moore,
hmm
peace to Tommy Tillman. There were a handful of others, King and Starkey, uh, Renee and Renard Rose. These are people that may and may not bump into this podcast, depending on where they are in the world now. Um, they took us and they saw that we had maybe a gift. Like I said, my memory was pretty good. I was precocious in a lot of things, academia, and you were a product of this too. So don't let you let this
That's
slip.
coming. That's coming.
We,
Come
we
on.
we were the test group.
Uh-huh.
Uh, we were the test group, and they were like, could you take children who have done well and just test them out where they don't need to do certain grade stuff? And they did that. They did that. They moved us from second, I believe, to third grade. So I was the youngest in my class, and a lot of us would do that.
Mhm.
The equivalent, though, they didn't standardize it. So they kept us in our same grade. They just kept advancing us in math books. So when we were in third grade, we were doing fourth grade math books and textbooks, and they just kept expanding that. But my grade never changed. So I was still a second grader, but I was doing third grade, all of the stuff that the third graders. I was sitting in class with the third graders, but my official graduating time was still on par. But we were the test group, and there were a handful of us that went through the gifted and talented program. They call it GATE.
hmm
We were the experiment. You were the actual thing.
Right. Right. Okay. So that's what I wanted to
So
get into.
you were the real. So
I
my
always felt
generation.
like I was chasing you because of that.
No,
And
we were
so
the experiment.
you went through the experiment when it was my turn because I was always a year or two behind you. When it was my turn, it was an actual physical
It's a
school,
program.
right? Where
Right.
they took us out
Right.
of class,
Right.
and that's what fed my IT career. Honestly, that's what started my IT career
Makes
because they
sense.
would take us out of school and then we would do stuff like we would work with scripting and programming for an hour or two every day. We
Right.
had advanced science classes every day, and then they'll bring us back to school where we'll finish out our day, and that's what started me and my father. And the funny thing is,
Wow.
my father was doing it like this little dude is not going to out learn know something that I don't know nothing about. So he put all his time, effort, and his hobbies into IT. Now back then,
Okay.
this is like '89 maybe, where a computer would cost you well over $2,000.
Right.
That was the equivalent of a calculator today.
Right. Right. Real talk.
But because of that, he went through it. He was self-taught, and a lot of people benefited from that education because he helped bring the church we grew up in,
Absolutely.
into modern technical space. And he helped a lot of people. So that education not only helped me, it helped the whole community of other people by just sowing the seed into that one. Well, actually, two kids, me and you.
Right. So yeah. So you had. So I remember that. So you were that group. You and there was a another young
Daryl
man.
Gary.
Yeah, Daryl Gary.
Mm-hmm.
Daryl Gary, and there was one more. What was Melvin's last name? Melvin was a year behind me. You guys were the actual proof of concept. You were actually the actual kids that they took out. Said this program works. We're going to skip you. We're going to put you ahead in those things. And that was the beauty of that type of investment in people,
Mhm.
and that type of investment in children, regardless of what they look like. So I didn't I didn't skip. I just had the opportunity to use my talents with no bounds to a certain degree. Now there were caps to that. When I got to junior high, they put a hold on that, and we got tracked. And there's a whole lot of things, and that's another conversation for another podcast, because you realize policy of race and racism, even when you try to do things in the best interest of children, are only so powerful and are fleeting and limited. They are not panaceas, meaning they aren't the answer for all things that oppress a group of people and remove opportunity. So while those things were beneficial, there were other things that were still in place in our community and in our schools that were not beneficial, and it kind of undid some of that stuff. And and I still see the repercussions of that today. Speaking of which, now I've kind of embrace that idea of what it means to remove barriers, policies that are barriers to people's success and wealth and health and well-being, and to actually endorse and to advocate for those things, because I realize those are just as important and as powerful as school, as education, as all these things that we think make people advance. You got to actually be on the front line and saying this law has to change, this policy has to change. It's not fair that these kids at this school have this, despite the school being integrated, but it being redlined to a certain district where they don't get the funding as the neighborhood school just across the street. I remember Great Bridge, Western Branch. During our times, those schools were getting different resources and were utilizing different things that our school didn't have at Deep Creek.
Right.
And it was very much weighted on the social economics of and historical policies of race. Nobody likes to talk about that, but I look back at it now, the way Camelot, being predominantly Black, looked compared to some of our counterparts in Great Bridge, those elementary schools. And you see that stuff still today.
Think about, I think we were blessed too, because we were so close to Deep Creek. Like if we were just Camelot, what would our high school look like?
Right.
And we got to benefit from a lot of the other communities around us with our school system. Like, I went to high school with people who turned out to be like governor's kids. And, so we got certain benefits that I don't think we may not have gotten if it was Camelot High School.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because we literally had to cross the tracks to go to high school.
Absolutely.
Even though we grew up in a successful middle class neighborhood, there still was segmentation.
Right. So you saw G.A. Treacle and Camelot on one side of the tracks. These are two high schools that were predominantly Black, some working class whites, and large Filipino population also that I have to shout out as well. And then you had another side that was a little more rural, African American, but then you had this wealthy enclave of old money. I went to school with people who were descendants of George Washington. They had large swaths and plots of land inherited from that acquisition of colonialism. And when you mix those things, opportunities is this almost exchange of ideas and concepts that you would not have been exposed to in these really siloed, insulated, segregated environments that were, kind of prior your and my generation. So that's a success story that the success story of integration is when you put people around others that they would not have an opportunity to experience. And that's just not financially and academically. That goes to a whole lot of movements. There's an opening of the mind, the third eye, the mind's eye. And so that being said and done, I know we got a guest coming on, so I want to continue this conversation, but I got a sister that's going to do this. Yeah, so you're driving, but I don't want to halt the mic.
All right, so what are we going to do? And since you're a podcaster yourself, I'm going to bring her on and you give her the introduction. How about that?
Okay, then. All right,
here she goes.
Welcome, sis. How are you doing?
Hello there.
I'm doing well.
So I'm going to introduce you. So there is a movement that is actually ancient, as old as human beings are themselves. And we are now just rediscovering it. We've been focusing on history and the importance of history. So I'm going to tell you that once again, past is prologue, and once again, what has happened before will happen again. So that history is who you're witnessing with us as this third member of this roundtable discussion. It is the good Dr. Chidi MD. And this is what we call her. We call her the Queen for Queens. And the reason I say history is important because Black Girl Magic is something that people are, oh, that's new. That ain't new.
No,
It's
no.
always been that way.
Definitely not.
Not new. But she is our addition to this long-standing history of Black Girl Magic. My co-podcaster, my co-sister on the front lines of emergency medicine and critical care, hailing from Queens, New York, by way of Nigeria, who now holds it down in Philadelphia, Philly at UPenn in emergency medicine. She will be joining us. And Chitty, welcome, sis. I just wanted to throw you out there because this man right here that you're seeing. This is our version of Tony Stark's Iron Man. He is a man. He's a techie, a technocrat that has literally an artificial heart. He's an LVAD patient. He's a genius in his own right. I couldn't find a more powerful synergy to team up superheroes in this case.
Yeah.
And so you tell them who you are for your own sake. I gave you a little introduction just to introduce my 757 crowd home to who you are and why you're here with us today. But tell them who you are, where you're from, and what you do now.
Yeah, like you gave me. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you.
Spam.
Hi, Sean. Nice to meet you.
Hey, how you doing?
Yes. Bullet. All right. So, like John said, I hail from Queens, New York. I do live in Philadelphia now. My full name is Chidima Wakama. I'm an emergency medicine doctor in Philadelphia. I was trained in New York. I recently got married, so my last name is now tricky. I'm going through the process of trying to change my last name, but keep it professionally, but change it socially, and it's kind of tricky.
My
You guys
wife did,
don't have to think about that.
my wife didn't even do it. She just left it the way it is.
I mean, yeah, I know. Most people are like, don't do it, but
Right.
it means a lot to my husband. So I'm like, all right, let me change my name. But because I've done a lot with my maiden name, I'm kind of like, all right, I got to keep this so that for continuity. But I'm going through the process. But yeah, I'm so happy to be here. I asked John, I was like, all right, what are we going to talk about? So I can like try to get myself together. He was like, everything.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah, so I was like, all right, I can rock with that. So I'm really happy to be here. I see you got the brick wall. I got the brick wall.
Yeah, but
We're
I
here.
got a feeling your brick might be a little bit realer than mine.
Yeah.
My brick didn't come from the rock quarry; it came from Amazon.
Yeah. I was like, I see that. I see it.
So
It's very
Chitty,
nice.
let me
Yeah.
tell you, let me just break this out there. So you two guys are always stunting on me. So whenever I do something, Chitty's always one up in me. So whenever we take pictures, Chitty's got this like Bride magazine spread. And I'm like, yeah, my pictures don't look like that. Whenever I do something tech, Sean's got this layout that looks like he's going to like Burning Man or like he's at Coachella and stuff with the full board and laid out. And I'm like, yeah, my sound setup don't look like that. So so I'm playing sidekick to you two today. I'm just letting you know that's where it is.
Now, I just got through telling him how I am who I am because I constantly felt like I was chasing him. So for him to hear him say that has me all kinds of just. So, all right. So I want you guys to talk about your podcast, but let me say, you started before I did. And you, like you were saying, how my dad made certain things real to you. You made it real to me, like, oh, that's attainable. I can do this. But the one thing I love is how you guys are a group of doctors, medical professionals. You come from all diverse backgrounds, but you keep it 100% real. Just the fact that I feel like your podcast is hip hop relatable. So that breaks it down for a lot of people that could come at it in a real way. Like, so one of the reasons I started the LVAD podcast was because I went through this and I did my research. And John, you know how we do. We research everything.
Right.
And
Maybe too much.
Right. It was hard for me to find somebody that can truly speak to me, most importantly in a non-medical way.
Yeah.
And it was impossible for me to find somebody that looked like me to speak to me in that way. So I felt the need for that. And it basically allows other people with LVADs, no matter what their breakdown, what their race, what their upcoming is, to come tell their story. and how they deal with and handle life with either LVAD or a heart transplant. And listening to your guys' podcast was made me be like, that's feasible. And the
Mhm.
realness you brought from. So I don't know if John told you this. I'm about to bring out some secrets. Me and
What?
John go back to like 5 years old. Me and John Walson and his brother Steve had a rap group back in the day.
Oh, were you a part of the rap group?
Yes.
So you're in that picture with the gun?
No, that's my college group. So
Oh,
I've
This
got,
is
you had a lot
before
of groups.
then.
You was doing
This-
Beyonce, Destiny's Child.
I'm gang affiliated, so I got all these connections. So I got all these
You was
La
doing Destiny's
Familias.
Child, switching in the members. Okay.
So
No, he's right. We were part of a hip hop group collective, a even bigger collective actually.
yeah, because it spawned off to be multiple groups. And I
Wow.
really think we were way ahead of our time, because if that would have happened 5 years later,
Mhm.
it would have been different. Like we at one time had a small local record deal, but
Oh.
we were before our time. But we were deep. This is back in deep consciousness of rap. The rap group was called Life,
Love it.
Living in Full Effect.
Real fat.
Yes. And it started in you remember?
You talking about church at New Hope?
Yeah, it started we went to a Christian retreat called Eagle
Aw.
Eyrie.
Eagle Eyrie. Oh my gosh,
Yes.
this is embarrassing, bro. This is
And they had an open mic. So Eagle Eyrie is this real, especially at that time, progressive retreat for people. I think it was like the Southern Baptist Leadership
Right.
Council,
that's it.
and we would go to this mountain in the middle of Virginia, and there was nothing around. I think it used to be an old college or something, so there was dorms and stuff.
Cool.
And it's 50, 60 churches, and sent
That's
all their
fun.
kids. Sent all the kids
fun.
up
It
there.
was fun.
Oh yeah, it was really fun, because we didn't realize it gave us the confidence to even step out and do an open mic, and we tore it down. And then we came home, was like, we got to do something with this. And yeah, we did. That was that was one of the starts.
I
And
love
peace,
that.
peace to Rob Poole, rest in power, brother,
Yeah,
who was
bro.
actually a part of that original collective. Harold Poole,
Harold.
Walson Williams. There were a whole lot of people who, Jason Gray,
Mhm.
and that was the start. I wasn't on the mic, Chitty, at that time. I was on the mic. I was a spectator. I was a closet rapper.
Oh.
I was a closeted MC. They didn't know that I had,
They didn't know you had bars.
We
They didn't
knew.
know I had bars back in
We
those days.
knew.
They didn't know. They didn't know. And then,
We always say he was the mastermind behind a lot of stuff, but he was laid back. He was very laid back. But so, and talking about earlier how things go in full circle, when I saw your podcast and saw how you had put hip hop in it, I was like, yeah, that's John.
That's all him. I mean, they had kind of collected, because I'm in Philadelphia, so the other two members, Jawad and Chris, they all work together in Atlanta. And so Jawad and I went to residency together, so we're really close friends. And he's like, yo, this is our ticket out. This is our ticket out. This is our ticket out. I'm like, what is it? And he's like, we're going to do this podcast. And he's telling me all about it. And I'm like, yo, that's dope. Like the music part, and then the hip hop, and then the Black culture and the brown culture, and then the medicine. It just made so much sense to me. I was like, you guys need a woman. You need a woman. And then he was like, oh, you're right. He's like, let me talk to them and see what they say. And they were like, yeah, come on. Because I'm like, how are you going to have three guys? Like, where's the female perspective? Right. And like everything that he was saying resonated so much with me that I was like, yo, I have to be a part of this. And it was just like, was very, like our first podcast, I didn't even know them really. And we just got on the mic and like all of us just kind of meshed, and the personalities meshed. We all have really distinct, different personalities, and it really just meshed. And I'm really happy that I had the opportunity to know them, and happy that I have the opportunity to like share a platform with them, because I really believe in what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that we can have like a really huge reach and influence. So I'm happy that you listened.
Yeah. Like before I
So
was even thinking about doing a podcast.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That's cool, brother, that we inspired you. And now really probably just looking at how fast you've grown, you probably outreached us now. So this is why this is important to give back to one another, because
Yeah.
there's no reason that we can't collaborate. You know, people like to use the crabs in the barrel phenomenon. I don't subscribe to that. You
Yeah,
know, I did. You know, people have always been detractors. That's nothing new. And I don't think that's unique to our people or any other one group of people.
Mhm.
At the same time, though, if you're going to talk about reaching back, or you may be thinking somebody's reaching back to pull you down. Sometimes they're reaching back to get a hand up. We got to look at the perspective. What side on that crab in the barrel mentality? Or is that crab reaching back to trying to pull somebody down? Is it,
Right.
are you holding on to my leg, or are you holding your leg because you're trying to get up to?
Right.
And I see this as us trying to pull one another up. So salute to you giving us our props for just inspiring you. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is like the Fugees. Chitty is I'm our Wyclef John right at this point. Chitty's going to be our Lauryn Hill. She's going to break off, and I'm going to be like, yeah, I remember back in the days.
Oh, please.
You'll be like megastar, and the rest of us gonna be on the sidelines.
Oh,
like, yeah,
please.
I remember when she won't even in the group. You know, we
Right,
started, it was
right.
just us.
But don't get mad because Wyclef is doing his
please.
thing now, so it's okay.
No,
He's
it's
just
just
behind the scenes.
it's all good. It's all good. And in all honesty, man, this is Chitty was right. This is our podcast is a open table. And I'm gonna do this right now because it's Pride Month for some. And you know, as a Christian, you know that's a celebration that doesn't enter into my church space very
Yeah.
well. Most of us are intersectional.
Mhm.
That's a term that we use, that we cross many spaces and we are a part of multiple demographics. But as a part of my evolution and messaging and health and my walk in faith, I got to say this is that I now have attuned my ear to hearing the cry of human beings,
Mm.
whether they change their outward appearance, whether they look like me, whether they talk like me, whether they sound like me, whether they vote like me. And our podcast is really a table in the tradition of someone who walked 2,000 years ago, who sat with people that no one else would sit with, who touched people that no one would lay a hand on, who actually were willing to speak a voice that was sometimes not well heard or accepted. That's what our podcast is.
Yeah.
It's couched in hip hop, it's couched in medicine, but these are just, you know, small factions of it. The idea is that we will have a table that we can hear all voices, and we don't always have to agree to recognize one's humanity. We don't all have to look the same to recognize one's right to live healthily, right to live in spaces where they're not threatened and they're not harmed. I don't have to co-sign everything you do. You better not co-sign everything I do, because everything I do is not necessarily healthy either. But we need to be able to sit and listen to that. So we're going to and we're actually going to focus on our next series of podcasts, or we've done this before. A lot of people that you otherwise wouldn't have listened to. There is no transgender movement in hip hop that is really visible, but there are voices that need to be heard. And just because you don't agree with them doesn't mean you don't have to listen. You can't listen to them.
So it's funny you brought that up. I just recently did an interview with a young man who he has a great podcast. Shout out to Michael Munoz, and his podcast is called the In Your Mouth Podcast. And he is a gay Puerto Rican. He says he don't want to be called a chef, but cook, but chef. And his podcast is about, you know, in that space and all of those spaces. And we had a great talk. And one of the reasons I have an association of other podcasters that my peers that I kind of learn from, and we all, you know, have this meeting of the minds every morning. And he's part of that. And my daughter listens to it with me. And he got up and spoke one day, and she was like, "Daddy, that's who I want to talk to. That's what I want you to talk to, because that's something we need to know about." And she was quite honest. It was like, "Daddy, that's something you need to know about."
Wow.
And I was like, "You right. You're right." So I subscribe to that, and I find that, you know, I may not accept everything, but I do believe everybody needs to be able to express themselves and have that type of platform. So, and you never, and to me, it was one of the best interviews I ever had.
Right.
And I take that back because I don't like to say that my podcast is about interviews. I like to say it's about conversations.
Mhm.
But it was one of the best conversations I had, and one of the things we spoke about was the similarities between the Black community and the gay community, and what that looks like as far as discrimination.
Mhm.
And you'll be
Right.
surprised; it's different, but it's the same.
And you don't know that until you listen.
Hmm.
You don't know that till you sit beside a person. That is why this is important. That is why Chitty and I could probably wax prolific about being emergency physicians. Chitty is in Philadelphia, another bustling urban environment, and she's a New Yorker.
New Yorker.
Yeah, New Yorker. Sorry, I'm thinking. Know what I was thinking? I was mixing up
That right?
New York. I was mixing up New York Rican because I heard Puerto Rico in my mind. So yeah,
I'm like,
yeah, New
really?
York. I'm a Virginian, not a
Okay.
Virginian. So I feel you. I feel if you said Virginia, I've been all over you. I'm like, that's messed up. But when you're in those spaces where that are rich with a lot of different experiences and stuff,
Mhm.
you hear stories that are not your stories, but then become a part of your story, right? Because they're now people that you care about. They're now people that have influenced you. They're now part of this larger community. That's the theme of this conversation we've been having. Like, oh yeah, I've got a cool, brother that, he's gay, he's, Middle Eastern, he's this. They're like, oh, I didn't know people were like that. Right. I didn't either. But when you have a larger community, those stories become then part of your story. Your stories
Hold on,
become a
watch
part of their
this.
stories.
So we started live streaming at New Hope, right?
Oh wow, you took it to church?
Yeah, bro. Yeah, who you think? So we're live streaming the services at New Hope, and somebody reached out to me. It's like, I like what you're doing. Can you help me with my church? And I was like, yeah. So I'm thinking like, this is somebody, in Virginia or whatever. It was a brother in Scotland.
Wow.
Totally blew my mind because you don't necessarily think of brothers in Scotland
Right.
at the same time, but it's there.
Intersectionality. Right.
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 So, but
Colonialism strong.
Yes.
Global reach.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
So I hate to do this because I got another interview coming up, and we're gonna have to. First of all, ma'am, I'm extending an invite right now. You need your own time on my platform, so we're gonna get in touch with you. We're gonna send you what we need to send you. I want to talk to you without this man. Hold on, without this man right here.
I would love to.
So it begins. So it begins.
The
I know.
takeover
This is my
begins.
way.
Oh my God.
So with that said, John, this is how I end up all my episodes. If a young John Lewis came to you asking you for life advice about life, what would you tell him?
This is going to seem very hypocritical. Talk less, listen more, do more.
I'll take that. I'll take that. And yes, it's hypocritical coming from a man of many words.
Right.
But again, John, we got to do this again because we didn't even scratch the surface, bro.
We didn't. So follow if you're following this man, you can follow us on the trail. We're at emremix.com. That's EMREMX.com. You'll find all of our social media links. Sean will upload the social media links, and then follow Chitty MD on all her social media platforms. Please, Chitty, tell them where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at CHIDIMD. And then I think on Twitter, it's just Chitty with an underscore and then MD. Somebody had the original one. So I joined Twitter really late. But yeah, you can follow me there too. And I try to post content basically on my travels and photo shoots that I curate with my husband.
Dope pictures. I mean, magazine worthy, literally magazine worthy. Now every now and then she'll try to spit some bars. I got to work on it with that. But the picture game, she got it on lock. She got the picture game on lock.
So, doctor, what kind of camera do you use?
Me?
Right now? Oh, you mean for the photo shoots?
Yeah.
Oh no, I hire a photographer.
Oh.
She's Nigerian, man. You know, always they got to be next level, man.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what me? What camera do I use? No. Yes, I do have a camera. It's not a good camera at all. It's actually a vlogging camera. I said I wanted to start vlogging, but that didn't happen. But everywhere, like this, someone gave me the idea that, you know, when you go on these vacations and stuff, like you should just get a photographer for 1 hour or so, just so you can have like a really dope memories. Because for me, like I'm the person who takes all the pictures. So I've gone on trips and I'm not in any pictures, and my husband's like in all the pictures. And so I was like, that's not fair.
So I got a new idea for you.
Yes, tell me.
I have a camera, and I won't charge you a dime, but you gotta take me with you.
I was like, no. We'll talk about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I gotta wrap this up. They gave you all yours, so now I had completed the major upgrade, so I don't have to tell you all the places to follow me. Just go to 757renaissanceman.com and you can find all the things, 2 up, 2 down. I see you, Camelot in the house. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the 757 Renaissance Man. I'm here with Dr. Chitty, that's what I'm gonna call you, and Dr. John, and I'm Sean, and we are out. Peace.